All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. And I want to say a big welcome to everyone to the third biennial food waste fair. I wanted to start off the panel. We have a really great panel with some amazing restaurants featured today. Some people from those restaurants at this very moment, one of the perks of Zoom. But I wanted to start off with some announcements. So for one thing, unfortunately, we had promised an interpreter for this event, but due to some personal life issues, this person is unable to join us today. So I really apologize for that in advance. So we will not have a Spanish interpreter on for today. A few other reminders, please don't forget to use that Q&A function. We'll be monitoring those questions throughout the panel, and we'll get to an audience Q&A section towards the end. These restaurants are doing some really cool things, so please, please, please ask some of your questions. And lastly, I wanted to plug the rest of our schedule. The Food Waste Fair goes through June 19th. And so for the rest of this week, I would encourage you to tune into the rest of our schedule. You can check it out at foodwastefair.com. And I would also encourage you to check out our food waste toolkit, which is a resource that New York City businesses and residents can check out to learn about how to reduce their food waste. And without further ado, I would like to throw things over to Bao and get this panel started.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bao Ong here. I'm the editor of Eater New York, fairly new to the role. Very excited to be here today to talk with a great group of people who, who are living and breathing this. So like they're much more of the expert on this. So, just kind of to maybe like kind of some background, like one of the numbers that, when I've like reported on food waste in the past, one of the numbers I see all the time is that nearly 40% of the food supply in the US, is either thrown out, it's never eaten. At the same time, I think the other number that's also out there is that about 41 million Americans, face food insecurity. So, it's definitely an issue that that's, been talked about within the restaurant industry, not only this year, but for a while. So before we dive into the questions though, could everyone just kind of introduce themselves on the panel? Claire, would you like to start?
I would love to. Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Sprouse. I have a small bar and restaurant in Crown Heights, Brooklyn called Hunky, Dory. My background is in operations and beverage, mostly, specifically cocktails. And I've spent the last decade or so kind of researching and advocating for and distilling down that information for my peers to enact more sustainable practices in their businesses and in their cocktails. And that is everything from food waste to water conservation and all the millions of factors that are tied into all of those things to make a sustainable community.
JJ?
And thank you for having me.
I'm JJ Johnson, chef and founder of Field Trip in New York City. Our OG location is in Harlem. Food waste is a topic on my mind all the time. But the one area that I'm focused on is farming and agriculture through rice, and how that will help society for a better place with right farming practices. So we have 3 locations: one in Harlem, between 115th, 116th, one in Rockefeller Center, and another one in Long Island.
Thank you. Naama?
Hi, I'm Naama Tamir. I've been running Lighthouse restaurant with my brother for the past 10.5 years. Lighthouse is a neighborhood restaurant with a very strong environmental and social kind of like good practices approach, really trying to create a new environment for businesses. And we have been partnering with all kinds of different organizations, and really excited to be on this panel and learn from my fellow panelists and discover how we can do more.
Thank you. Halley?
Hi, everyone. So nice to be with you all today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Halley. I am the director of a small restaurant group in Brooklyn. We're home to 3 restaurants, including a zero waste natural wine bar and a zero waste catering company. I think when we talk about sustainability and food waste, as well as just waste in general, we're really looking at it from a 360 perspective, thinking not only about how to incorporate best practices within our restaurant, composting, recycling, upcycling, but really creating relationships with our vendors and suppliers across the industry to create closed loop, trash-free kind of delivery and relationship mechanisms so that we can really have spillover effects across the supply chain. So Rodora, our natural wine bar in Fort Greene, is kind of our test lab for all of those ideas around sustainability, both environmental, food waste, as well as trying to think more creatively about how to create sustainable spaces for restaurant workers and our staff that work within our spaces. So a pleasure to be here today. Everyone on this panel has really been mentors in one way or another to me as I've tried to help our restaurant group become more sustainable. So it's really an amazing group here.
Thanks, Halley. Before we kind of dive into questions, that maybe stem from the pandemic and other issues that that you guys are exploring. I wanted to ask first about, where has the discussion, about food waste and how it relates to sustainability, how is it different today than, 5 or 10 years ago? Because some of you have been, working at this, before it was like, kind of being covered a lot as, a climate issue or a health issue or, even related to like workers' rights. So I'd love to like, if someone could, weigh in on like, kind of like how the conversation has shifted in the past decade or so.
I think there's a conversation. I mean, when we opened Lighthouse and started working on this project 10 and a half years ago, I felt like there was no discussion. I remember kind of in my mind thinking people are going to be so excited about this new initiative and, kind of changing the paradigm and having, this beautiful space and restaurant with great food that also got so many other things right, and realized that sustainability was not on anyone's agenda, was definitely not anything cool, right? And I remember sort of saying somehow an oozing egg on a blog is so much more driving in terms of like bringing guests over than a restaurant that is paying fair wages and taking care of their waste and buying good produce. And I think in the last 10 years there's definitely been a shift where there is conversation. Consumers are interested in packaging in your initiatives. The restaurant culture and the consumerism culture has shifted, and it is starting to be something that is important to guests and customers and restaurants. And I see all the organizations, even on the toolkit from the fair, right? There are just so many organizations helping in that space. So it became easier to do the right thing because there's this network that can help you get there. Huge change.
Did anyone else want to add to that, or kind of your own experience as well?
I mean, I can say it from a cocktail perspective. Every year there's like the 10 trends going into the next year, and sustainability has been, on and off that list for, a good part of the last decade. And I've been personally waiting for that moment where it stops being a trend of the year and just becomes like normal day-to-day practice. And I think especially even in the last year, people are really being able to connect the dots more clearly between the fact that like it's not just like food waste in restaurants, but how the supply chain works all around. Like we saw pictures in the news of fields of rotting onions while there were people that like really needed food in New York. And and while there's grocery store workers going into work in the middle of a pandemic. And so people are able to start connecting these dots and these pieces that make up our food ecosystem and the supply chains. And so I think there's definitely a more holistic approach to viewing these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are just take the straw issue, right? Like the straw went from like plastic to paper, and it was a great movement. And I remember people getting mad about, oh, there's no plastic straw. Why? My drink isn't the same. I can't stir that drink properly. It's like, well, it's bigger than just you, right? Do you want to be here to at least stir a drink? Do you want the ocean to be okay? And I think from a society standpoint, I think we all should take kind of a step back and look at waste in general. For myself as a chef, I watch how much food the industry wastes, and it's just okay, right? Squaring up those vegetables to be very beautiful on the plate. And where do the scraps go? You hope it goes to something else, but most of the time it doesn't. It goes in the trash. So as a restaurant industry, we waste tons of food, and how can we stop that? I think during the before the pandemic, we were taking this big approach to getting away from plastic and all this paper, and we were going more reusable. And then the pandemic hit and COVID, and then we kind of reverted back to society where everything should be individually packaged and not thinking about the waste. I'm sure the waste has grown by 100, and that will start coming out probably in the fall, that there's all this waste all over the place, and what should we do with it? I think there's a lot going on with waste in general. But for myself as a chef, I'm constantly looking at the food waste and how to just utilize the product and make it be delicious, and not really be concerned about beautiful cuts of carrots or things on a plate, or vegetables or items on the plate, because the whole vegetable is delicious by itself.
Well, that kind of leads me to, it's kind of like a two-part question here. JJ, you kind of touched on it, but I think there are people who are, who have signed on to this, who they want to hear about, how you guys have addressed food waste in your restaurants, like what has worked for you. In addition to that, how has the pandemic affected that or changed it in the past year or so?
I can speak to the first part of that question. When we were building, having zero waste as your foundational mission is actually quite helpful in building a restaurant program, because it limits your choices so much. So when we were designing the program, we thought a lot about PARs, and thought a lot, which is restaurant speak for how much of a dish you're putting out, what does that product look like, and tried to think carefully around how could we minimize how much we were bringing in, how could we almost make it individually portioned so that we're throwing out as little as possible. So that was a big consideration, is how can we structure our food menus and almost reverse engineer them to provide offerings for our guests and clients that don't just scream, this is a zero waste space, but provide enough and are smartly thought out. Not only thinking about the cost of goods and your price point, but really like, what does a sustainable offering look like, and how can we think more intelligently about that? I think we have an in-house composting program that's made a really big difference. I hope we talk later about the barriers to entry in building sustainable businesses. In some ways we can get past that, but certainly, purchasing a compost machine felt like a really big expense. Once we did it, the returns were super powerful. We were able to bring our compost up to the Brooklyn Grange, which is a kind of a neighborhood farm. And I think just trying to think outside the box about how we can incorporate kind of best practices that you see on home and consumer level into your restaurant space has been a powerful way for us to navigate that question.
Yes, go ahead now.
I think pre-pandemic, it very much to what Halley mentioned. I think it's a lot about planning. It's about looking at the way the restaurant operates, really looking at the numbers, doing your orders properly, and planning a menu properly so that you are using all of your vegetables and all of your proteins and everything to the best of your ability, and really planning to throw as little as possible. And it also relates to just in general running a good business. If you are buying locally and you're buying from farms that you appreciate, you're buying fairly expensive produce and you really do want to use all of it. And so when we design the menu, we're always designing it to have dishes, and then to have kind of like dishes that use the less attractive parts of a vegetable, or the little ends of herbs. And so it's really about being thoughtful in your planning. And then I would say in the pandemic, one of the things that I think maybe shifted the restaurant in general is that the menu kind of shrunk. It made more sense with a smaller staff and just a lot less ability to see into the future and have that data of how many people are going to come in and out. We had to shrink and really kind of exercise a new way of thinking about the restaurant. And we've definitely kept a smaller menu that kind of changes more often to still be exciting, but easier to maintain. And of course, you know, being thoughtful of a packaging and delivery and how much things are traveling and all of that. So I mean, much more challenging, but also, you know, it was an interesting exercise, and we had more time to really look in deep into what we were doing and what was more popular. And there's something about kind of having to stop everything and do it again in a way that was very eye-opening for us. And you know, I mean, definitely a difficult time, but I think for a lot of restaurants, it kind of like gave us a new perspective on what we were doing before, when things were just moving so quickly and it was hard to gauge sometime what was going on. This time kind of allowed us to see some things in clarity.
So there was a point made earlier about, you know, as restaurants were navigating the pandemic and, you know, the shift to like to go and delivery and like all the issues that brings up. There's a question here that we have regarding packaging, you know, like kind of, you know, what's your stance? How do you source your to-go service? Where, and are you aware of the different compostable certifications out there? I think I'm not familiar with, but CMA versus BPI.
Well, I'm not aware of all the compostable certifications. I am aware of that some of the containers that are saying that they are biodegradable or this or that, they're not. We were using a container at FIELDTRIP early on that was layered with a plastic liner at the bottom, but they were still telling us that this was a compostable container. So it is a very tricky world to navigate. I feel like it's food labels. You know, you can say this about like free range chicken, but they're running on the sidewalk. It's the same thing in regards to this paper good product, compostable, what's right out there. So, you know, I'm learning more about it and I'm being more conscious about it. But most restaurants that I see just in the Harlem community, or even Rockefeller Center, people are actually reverting back to like these older school, cheaper to-go containers because to try to make some money. And I'm constantly having a conversation.
I think it's, you know, I used to live in San Francisco, and the services for restaurants and for residents are so wildly different than they are here. And so I think navigating like what is suitable for your environment is, you know, there's no like nationwide like silver bullet for that. You kind of have to dig deeper. And I will say that there is not always a great amount of transparency within that. In New York itself, like we don't really have robust composting to deal with things like greenware cups for iced coffee. And what I tell people is to, you know, the recycling center offers free recycling tours. And like as much as we can set up systems in our own restaurant, end of the day, people are always going to be taking things in and out of our restaurant. And so while we try to create some sort of like really careful streams of waste sorting in our restaurant, we also have to think about what is widely available outside of it. And so I always recommend for people to like, you know, go to the recycling website or go do a tour. They do virtual tours right now and really learn about like our systems here, because it's they're so unique and people want to. When I did the first recycling tour, a gentleman named Sam led our group, and he had this great term called wish cycling, when people like throw things away in the recycling because they think it's like recyclable, or they really want it to be, or they're like led to believe it is. And it's really about not only restaurant owners, but also consumers doing their due diligence to know how to navigate the systems that we have available to us. But it is, you know, it was really hard for us to make the decision to go to single use. We had to do that in weighing out like what we felt was safe for our staff. And so we chose to go completely single use, even for dining in. And that's something that we look forward to getting rid of now that we're all inching towards some semblance of normalcy.
Yeah, I think the pandemic put all of these choices into kind of stark relief. Our catering company lost all of its business and pivoted to kind of direct to consumer home delivery. And while we had never used plastic packaging previously, when the city stopped offering citywide composting, we realized that us sending people compostable materials was not going to do anything. If it ended up in the recycling, rinse recycling. If it ends up in the trash, there's no point. So we made the decision to switch to plastic packaging, which was like, you know, it's not a good choice. But I think it really emphasizes, you know, we have this idealistic idea of sustainability in America, and people so frequently get called out for greenwashing. And we try to think about sustainability, about food waste, and really all aspects of it as a constantly evolving goalpost. Like there's no end state of zero waste. There's no end state of being sustainable. And that adaptivity and responsiveness is really critical to allowing more people to enter this space, to not feel fear about greenwashing, and really realize that this is a movement that's constantly evolving. So that's.
You know, as you guys have figured out ways to like reduce food waste, I think Halley, you mentioned earlier, the composting machine actually kind of paid off or helped save, you know, money as well. Can you guys talk about, how efforts of reducing waste can actually, have an impact on the bottom line for your business, and, or, you know, any examples of that?
Sure. I mean, yeah, on that metric, commercial trash carting, commercial waste is really expensive for restaurants. They don't do a great job of actually weighing what you're putting out, so you often get overcharged, and it's, you know, a weekly recurring, multi times a week recurring expense. Our ability to put a compost machine in our restaurant allowed us to stop trash pickup completely. So there's a huge amount of cost savings there. And, you know, the machine costs some thousands of dollars, but over 2 years, that certainly reduced our trash bill quite significantly. So I think that's made a huge difference. I also think, and I'm sure other people can speak to this as well, using reusable materials rather than saran wrap or, you know, traditional forms that you usually, or a million seafolds, things you usually see in kitchens. You're just not purchasing as much, and that has long-term positive impacts as well.
I'll say that I think we've always approached food waste as not, or addressing food waste as not like a restraint or a limitation, but something that inspires like our menus. And I don't know his name, but I had a conversation with a chef, a Swedish chef, an actual Swedish chef, and he was telling me that, you know, food waste for him were just lost flavors and lost opportunities to learn. And that's something that I repeat a lot, because like we've created so many unique combinations, and not only are they like lost flavors, these lost opportunities to grow and push yourself further, but it's lost revenue. Like you're basically turning money out of nothing at that point, because it just would have went in the garbage. And so we're constantly like doing business in New York is very expensive, and out of everything in our business, our food costs are probably like the most pristine, like one of the lower items, because we are just so resourceful. And I think that it, it not only saves us money again, but it really pushes us to be like the creative individuals that we are also striving towards.
I'm agreeing with both of the panelists that spoke ahead of me. I mean, I think initially the cost of sustainability in terms of like what we use and when we were working with fellow composters instead of composting in-house, there was the cost was definitely higher, but moving to our own composter definitely helped reduce that. But for me, I think the biggest positive outcome and the most outstanding sort of like investment was that it created a culture that our staff really feels like they're working for something greater. And we've had an amazing retention of staff and just like a team that really believes in what we're doing, and having people really understand and want to come into work and be a part of this and really change their mindset and their mindsets at their home and with their friends has been by far the most rewarding. And I, you know, and in this decade of just restaurant industry really fighting for staffing and people that are loyal and wonderful, that really is you know, the biggest advantage that I can talk about. I mean, we for being as long as we have as a restaurant, we have staff that have been with us from day one, and you know, not having to rehire and retrain people is a huge investment. And I don't think that we would be able to do that if there wasn't another layer to running a business and that people want to be a part of, that they really believe in the mission and that they feel like they're doing more than just serving food and drinks. So that beyond everything that was said ahead of me, I think that's a big part for us as well.
You know, so for everything that, you know, you guys have done or are looking to do, you know, like there's a question out there right now, you know, like, you know, what policies, you know, would you like to see, you know, passed, you know, to make zero waste easier for, you know, New York City restaurants? And are there any ways that restaurants, you know, could be potentially incentivized to become, you know, more sustainable and eliminate more food waste?
I think food waste should be taught in New York City schools, like from a super young age, right? Because all this is just education, right? Everybody here has taken time to educate themselves somehow, went to the recycling center, which is, I'm going there. I'm going. And if anybody needs help with the trash company, because prices are high, I will help you because I don't have the space in my restaurant to help with compost. My space is too small right now, but hopefully in the future. But education is key. I think starting at super young age, not like 9th grade of school, like preschool or kindergarten, kids learning about food waste, kids learning about food. Food waste is key. Then we'll see the circle, right? Then everything will make sense. Kids will hold their parents accountable. Oh, mom, I read about this restaurant, or I see that the school's doing this, or I want to do this. Then it will have an effect. And then I think incentives 100% for restaurants that are working in a sustainable way and in a no food waste way will help us.
Thoughts from anyone else in terms of like policy changes or like how we can help, you know, make it easier for restaurants?
I mean, I think in order to see real change, we have to have absolute systematic change. I mean, we're all finding very creative, very difficult, sometimes very expensive solutions because we're individuals that are very passionate about the mission. But it absolutely comes at a personal and at a financial sacrifice. I have no doubt that each one of us, you know, is knowingly would, you know, run a much more profitable restaurants if we were doing things currently in the normative way. So having the city work with us, whether it's the health department and their different regulations or sanitation, you know, just coming up with a true system that separates waste, that helps restaurant use green energy, that gives us resources, will create a huge difference and will allow so many more of us to do better and to, you know, kind of really come up with a holistic system, right? I mean, at the moment, we're all segmented, like trying to make these like tiny little changes where if we all work together and really figured out the proper way, what is the best time, what are the best vehicles, how can we move as a city to regenerative energy? How can we truly come up with a system for compostables that can be properly processed, using the right amount of energy, making sure that the routes that our waste trucks are taking make sense in terms of like traffic and hours and manpower and how everyone is being paid. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. I think there is definitely a movement and we're all going in the right direction, but for all of it to sort of really be standardized and become the sort of natural way that we are doing things and would really benefit everyone. And specifically, I think the city that is also putting a lot of money into residential waste, right? So if we had a new kind of system that was really circular and really, from like change from the bottom up, we would see huge results. I mean, I always say that my sustainability Bible was cradle to cradle, and it really taught me how to think about systems in a different kind of way. And it's what I would love to see in the next New York Food Waste Fair is how do we really change the systems internally? How do we rethink this whole thing for residential and restaurants? And we'll see huge financial benefits, and I think a lot more opportunity for a lot of operators to do that.
Well, it seems like what you're saying is like, the education, educating people about the issue and like the policy, a lot of it seems to, fall on the shoulders of small businesses to make the change. What can be done and, what falls on, customers that come to your restaurant. Because it just seems like, the burden is kind of like, it doesn't come from a policy level or it doesn't happen in the schools, but that you have to kind of, start that change, institute those like policies.
I think I'd also add that, if this is a priority for New York City government, which it clearly is, thinking about restaurants as thought leaders and specifically these small businesses, like no one on this panel is like an empire restaurateur, we're all kind of independent businesses, just really committed to this. I have not found a lot of funding opportunity, whether it's grant making or otherwise, from the city to support initiatives to go green within restaurants. Like it's one of the hardest businesses to run. And certainly we are thought leaders, we are, influencers, everyone's obsessed with restaurants and chefs and food. And so certainly this is a focal point for pushing forward ideas around sustainability. And if there were more funding opportunities, more support for businesses wanting to explore avenues towards sustainability, both in food and really on a holistic system level, I think we'd see much faster progress across the industry.
I think that it does fall a lot on small businesses, and just like everyone here is saying, that there's a need for, if we want to keep promoting this, there's a lot of subsidies going out to different types of businesses in our government, and not many are going towards people that are kind of pushing this agenda forward, or businesses. And so that is something in itself that needs reevaluation. But I don't know where this would come from, but I've always been pretty vocal that we're all stakeholders in this, not just like the business owners and the employees, but our guests are too. And so there has to be a really big shift in the general society mentality of like who is responsible for what in our cities and who is responsible for everyone's health and well-being. And it is oftentimes like there's very singular views about it, or that's somebody else's problem. And unfortunately, or fortunately, actually, we are all in it together. And so it has to come from all angles, really.
Does that change, and maybe this is more for Halley or JJ with, kind of like different businesses, but or more than one location, like how, how does that scale when you have more than one location? I know there's at least like 2 people who asked about this, like how do you deal with food waste when you have more than one restaurant? And maybe that, I think you alluded to that changing during the pandemic as well, JJ, in terms of like how you source rice.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you got to put it in a playbook, right? It's part of the playbook now. And if you have multiple locations that are the same style of restaurant, like Field Trip, you're trying to find your cookie cutter model, and food waste has to be in the cookie cutter model. It's there, right? We have a compostable machine. We use these types of containers. We do this, this, and this, right? And you are carrying that from restaurant to restaurant. And as you are able to grow, that part of your business should get stronger. Actually, it shouldn't be harder because you actually know how to do it. And you're like, oh, I would do it this way this time instead. And then you're able to put that potentially in the next unit. And I mean, that's how it works. It's like building a kitchen. The first time you build a kitchen or a bar, you're like, oh, I thought it was great, but it wasn't. And then you do the next one, you should be doing it better. So you just have to put it into the playbook as you grow. And really, it, for me as a business owner, it's like, what do you care about personally? And that should bleed into your business, right? That should trickle into your staff some way, somehow. And you should stand for some stuff because you have a bigger voice. You have some impact in the community. You could actually make a change. And going back on the residential side, think about it. If you're a restaurant in a new residential building, maybe you can lean on the landlord to be food waste friendly, right? Maybe there's a compostable machine for the whole building. Then it doesn't lean on you with the cost. So there's so many different ways to play in it, especially with new developments going up in New York City, and they see restaurants more as a necessity than a luxury now, more than ever, that we can really push on the landlords to absorb some of this or to kind of fall in line with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd add that, Rodora is, again, like our kind of test lab, and mostly our group had been focused on carbon emissions previous to building Rodora. So we thought a lot about our carbon impact, but less about the ideas around waste, and kind of trying to reverse engineer those systems within our more traditional, quote unquote, traditional restaurants has definitely been difficult. Like walking into a kitchen that's been functioning for 10 years without really thinking about the importance of composting, the importance of really watching what you're doing, kind of every moment of the day. It definitely hasn't been easy, and there's always resistance. I think this goes back to what Claire said about building a collective that all has buy-in around these issues. I think waste, specifically in America and this like kind of industrial capitalist system, is so ephemeral to most people. They don't think about what they're doing when throwing something in the garbage. It disappears for you. So I think it's one of those areas in which showing by doing, learning by doing, learning by watching others who are doing something quote unquote progressive is really powerful. And that's kind of how we've been able to start to transform our other restaurants to be more in line with, completely zero waste practices. But it's always a work in progress.
There are a few questions. People have been asking this kind of a few different ways, but it sounds like the audience is like curious about how do you deal with excess food? Do you donate? If so, are there any challenges to it? Have you turned to apps, food waste apps like Too Good to Go? Would love to hear about that.
We use food waste, the food waste app Field Trip, in partnership with Rethink, so feeding the community. So whatever we have on food waste, we then use that in bowls that are going out the next day that are reheatable bowls to potentially fill a gap. We try to keep our food waste really low, but we have used some apps in the past, and the one that you just mentioned is an amazing app to use. at one point we were going to use it, but just, it's hard when we were just trying to keep our restaurants, just trying to keep it open in the heart of the pandemic. So as we move forward out of this now, we'll be looking potentially also to be on some of these food apps. I think it's also just great for people that potentially can't afford to eat at your restaurant. This gives them a chance to eat there as well.
For Lighthouse, I'm proud to announce that we do have very little food waste. So we do work with Rethink Food, but in other capacities, you have to have a certain amount to even donate. So it would make sense. But for little amounts or something left from a catering or an event, we'll just donate it to like neighborhood fridges and things of that nature, or give it to our staff to take home. It just sort of like unacceptable to throw it out. And then we have been working with a Delivery Zero company too. So using more reusable in that way, it really is, there's just so many ways to approach it. It's just about finding the right solution for your restaurant, your endeavor, much like what was said before. I think so much of zero waste is about building this community and building these partnerships, because we can't be zero waste by ourselves. It has to be this sort of community. And so kind of like a little bit going back to like the multiple locations and whatnot, kind of doing the work ahead of time for one restaurant will allow you this network and understanding what organization and partnerships and other companies are around you that can help you kind of like reach those goals. And it goes for food waste and delivery solutions and packaging and so forth. So just open, I think once you really tune in and really start to like dig into it, and wherever you are in the world, you'll either find the people that can help you or realize that there is a real gap and there's an opportunity there for a business. So it's, I encourage everyone that is listening in and is really curious to kind of like look at what's around them and find the right solutions that are right for where they are, that work in that environment.
So we also have a question about, if anyone on the panel can give suggestions on how to deal with, how you help overcome people's resistance to like wanting to change old ways of working, especially in, where you spend the time training people, but then there's also high turnover, in the kitchen, or running front of house operations. Like, any suggestions on how to train your staff?
For our catering company, we kind of face that issue a lot because, our kitchen is zero waste, but then we're catering events at all sorts of venues with an ever-changing host of, front of house staff. So we've kind of developed like a 10-minute pre-shift toolkit to explain our processes. We try to make it really simple and as easy as possible. Service is hard enough, front of house and back of house. So, like having to think about it too much is disruptive. When we're training new people, we literally put like a box in the kitchen, which is, we mark with a big question mark. So if you're confused how to compost, recycle, or upcycle anything, you just put in the box, and after service or after the event, we'll go through it. But I think it's, I think again, like the biggest barrier is in people's minds when they're like, oh my God, my work is already so hard. I can't add another layer of complexity. And just creating systems that try to ease that mental barrier to entry is something we've worked on over the past few years.
Go ahead.
We've been really lucky that, people come to work for us because of these things. So they've come into our space with the openness to learn, or their own ideas to share within that. I think that, we try to, again, reframe it as like opportunities to push ourselves more creatively and things like that. But, and then we have like, we do all of our linens in-house. So I think, going back to what Naama was saying about building a culture that's like there's this idea of little to low waste because it's embedded in all of our systems and all the structures we put into place. So because we do our own towels in-house, people are a lot more thoughtful because they actually see where it's going and how it's being cleaned instead of being put in a bin and then disappearing and a fresh new bin comes in back. In July, we're starting a small program where we're actually paying staff up to like 2 to 3 hours of wages to do like offsite endeavors that are in support of education around not only food and beverage, but these like sustainable, community-oriented values that we have. So whether it's like working in a community garden or going to volunteer somewhere, if they come back and they like report on it and share it through our restaurant and through the staff, then we're putting up X amount of dollars in wages to help support that. So it's like these like tiny mini scholarship type things that we're doing within house, just to I don't want to say bribe, but you know, to tell people, to show them that we do value that they're taking this stuff and bringing it outward into the community as well, and then bringing it back.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I think you know, this like kind of dovetails with a few questions that we've had from the audience about, you know, like, you know, is there a playbook of like lessons learned and, you know, best practices that you share with other businesses, you know, or is there a bigger need for a community of like, you know, kind of like best practices among like, you know, New York restaurant owners, you know, some sort of way for people to share like these type of ideas and, you know, kind of some transparency as well.
I've always personally believed that with the invention of the internet, that there are no secrets, or, you know, and so, you know, we can all, restaurants industry in general have a tendency to be very competitive and always trying to like out edge each other. And, but on these issues, I think that we don't have time to waste to, you know, try to reinvent the wheel in our own spaces. And so, you know, I think just talking to your neighbors, seeing what business associations or community associations are in your neighborhood and getting other businesses involved and just trying to like, you know, have these conversations really openly and transparent and share them. I'm totally the person that like, if I see somebody at the green market with a basket full of vegetables, I'm like, what restaurant do you work at? And like, you know, and starting up those conversations. I know that's not always easy when we're all like in this race somewhere. But I think the destination ultimately is for us to all have successful, healthy, sustainable businesses. And this is part of that. So just talking very simply, even if it's, and not just amongst like, I think there is a tendency in the media and in general to think of this as an endeavor that only like kind of precious cocktail bars and hip restaurants are a part of, but you know, like the Indian restaurant across the street from us, like we talk a lot about like, you know, how can we both use better packaging? Should we be like bulk buying together and things like that? So just not thinking about just talking to people that look like you or serve food like you or have branding like you, but like everybody on your block, really.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a question there. Somebody was asking about did food vendors go up on prices on us after the pandemic? I mean, if everybody's paying attention, there's a shortage on everything. I don't understand it at all. I think it's two sides of society. I think it's one from people to capitalize and gain some money back. And the other side is our agriculture system is just jacked up. And it's going to show. It's going to really show, and that's just based on history, different conversation. But I love on the same block, purchasing from the same people and pushing pushing them to give us better prices and looking out for each other that way. I do believe that is the future of the industry. And I'm 100% down for that, Claire. So you just let me know. I'm here with you.
I mean, I think that the supply system definitely has suffered. And in the same way that restaurant industry has lost employees and jobs and has been hurting, I also imagine the supply system is feeling something similar. Farmers weren't working in the same capacity and had to let people go, and then sort of like regrowing everything really rapidly. I imagine it doesn't happen overnight. So I feel like the expectation that the pandemic ended and now everything is back to normal is a little unrealistic, and it will take time for everything to kind of like really regenerate. You know, it's not like a light switch that you could just turn it on and off. There is, we all should expect a little bit of time and recovery. But I also agree with you that I think oftentimes, you know, when prices rise because of a certain condition and people are like getting used to paying higher, you know, more premium prices for certain stuff, producers will not go down on them because they feel like, okay, we've created a new standard and now it's accepted. And that's definitely something we should look out for as well. To, you know, I definitely feel like in our industry and so many other industries, true cost is not something that we're often seeing, and a lot of cost is externalized, and it's why so many things, including sustainability, are just not where they should be. And I don't, not to say that the new pricing that we're seeing has anything to do with that, but I mean, I would definitely be happy to pay that price if it did include proper wages and better energy use and water use and just thoughtfulness. But I think these conversations, talking about it, bringing it up, making sure that we are all aware of it, that we are really looking at where are things coming from and what those farmers and companies and whatnot are really charging us for, and definitely for our guests and consumers at large to like really understand, in the same way that no one wants to support child labor and sweat labor, you know, the same goes for our food system. And we just need to kind of like turn that awareness up. And, you know, with that, hopefully these systems will change, because there will be pressure to companies to conduct themselves in a different kind of way, not dumping their waste into our rivers and not using our natural resources as if they were their own.
Right. Last question here, but it's a kind of a big picture question, but you know, like how do you, the question is like, how do you convince or stress to other restaurants, you know, the importance of like sustainability and, you know, zero waste when they're just trying to survive, especially, you know, during a pandemic that's still, you know, not over, you know.
I mean, I think that restaurants, obviously, very obviously, were hit very hard this past year, but it's always been a survival game in a lot of ways, and it's always been really hard. And outside of Hunky Dory, I have another business that just does education to restaurants and bars on sustainability. And you know, I talk about all these like fun, creative things, and you know, how they can be very community or regional specific issues that like droughts, addressing droughts and so on and so on. But my personal experience teaching around the world for the last decades on these issues is that people really perk up when you start talking about the savings that are possible. I think it's important to acknowledge that, yes, this is an investment in resources, and that could be time and energy and education. All of those things are really important resources for owners because they are limited within ourselves. But, you know, there is opportunity for people to cut down on water bills by saving water, and to cut down on your trash hauling bills. And so those are the things that I've noticed that have really resonated with businesses that aren't necessarily as value driven or are a little hesitant to jump in the pool. And then also just, you know, I think for me, like zero waste is, I think, a really admirable goal, but it can also seem very daunting. And so I always tell people like pick 1 or 2 goals or like 1 or 2 food items or areas of waste and try to tackle those a month, 1 or 2 things, like something really easy. And then by the end of the year, you have like over a dozen, 2 dozen things that you've done in your business to make it more sustainable. And just like thinking along those incremental goals, because the big picture is it's a lot to tackle. But just starting there. People want to make fun of straws because it's such low hanging fruit. And, but I think that is a very worthy endeavor in itself. And then you just keep building on top of those things.
I totally agree with Claire. I think that when talking to restaurants or, you know, when I teach, I sort of do like sustainability plate by plate, and it's the same thing. I mean, I think about our journey, and we weren't where we are now 10 years ago. It was these little baby steps. We kept on, you know, making another connection and figure out, you know, another piece of that puzzle. And today, I think, you know, similarly, I think the staff that is involved is also very passionate about it. So they're willing to take on some of their own projects. So it really is just starting about something and then seeing the engagement and the excitement within your staff and the community and your guests and having this wonderful thing to talk about. And then all of a sudden you have room for more. And so like just allowing yourself to discover and start somewhere. And then I think feeling like you're doing something right will really help you get the rest of it done over time. And just, you know, eyes on the prize, like really be committed to getting better at what you do, in the same way that your menu and your wine list and everything else is important. This has to be a part of the mission as well.
Anything else that you wanted to mention, Halley or JJ, before as we wrap up here? We're just hitting our 1 hour mark here. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Lots of questions. We didn't get to all of them, but you know, please check out you know, the Food Waste Fair's other events and panels on the website. That's foodwastefair.com. It's a great conversation. Thank you everyone for your time, and let's go out and support the restaurants.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.